All right, there you go. So great interview. You answered all the questions perfectly. Got just a couple minutes here, no pressure. Just, do you have any questions for me? Anything about the job, anything about me personally, the company? No. Nothing? Nothing about, happy hours or what lunch places there are to eat? No. No questions. Don't have a single question for me? You could ask me about my dog. You don't have anything? No. What's going on YouTube? Jamie Potter here, PhD in Organizational Behavior from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. My goal in this channel is to unlock the value of research for organizations. And today I am talking to you about one of the most important topics to me as a recruiter and as a person, but also more broadly, and that is the idea of how do people decide what job they're going to do when they're older, right? It's kind of this major question. What am I going to do for 30, 40 years of my life for at least 1/3 of my time on this earth? And yet it's not always dealt with as scientifically and as rigorously as one would expect. Maybe you became a doctor because you loved the show ER or Scrubs, and maybe that worked out, but also maybe you end up not liking the role as much.
Oh my God, you finally have a nickname.
So it's a really big question, especially with unemployment so high now. We're gonna have a time where a lot of people are again searching for jobs, and this is actually a really good opportunity in a lot of ways for people that were sort of thinking, maybe I'll try a different role or move into a different industry. This could be the time to do so. But in order to decide on a type of job, you need some sort of typology, right? That breaks down jobs into various characteristics such that we can say for each given role, whether a doctor or a lawyer, here are the characteristics of those jobs that are most important. And then on the flip side, for people or employees, they can then for themselves list out which of these characteristics are most important to me. And then there's sort of this trivial matching exercise. The question then and the problem becomes, where in the world do we get this typology? To break down every single role across every industry, how could we possibly get something like that? It would just take decades and decades to develop, so it's not something I can just do overnight or just make up a list for you. So where could we possibly get that? Okay, where could we get that? Oh, let's go to the research. So this idea of job characteristics goes back a number of decades, but actually the backstory behind it goes back over a century. So in the late 19th century, there was this man named Frederick Taylor. Frederick Taylor was an engineer by trade, but when he was working in various plants as a manager, he really started thinking for the first time at that point over 100 years ago, how do we be more rigorous about work? Beforehand it was just a lot of kind of heuristics or, we'll try this, not sure if it's gonna work, but doesn't really matter. And Frederick Taylor, as an engineer, really brought this sort of scientific mind to the practice of work and management. Specifically, he was managing several different manufacturing plants or engineering plants throughout his time. So this sort of culminated in 1911 with a book that he wrote about scientific management. Again, the idea that we can sort of make things more efficient on these plant floors in various different ways, such that workers now can, maybe double their productivity. And so this book was great. It took off very recently. In fact, the Academy of Management awarded Frederick Taylor the most influential thinker of the 20th century for this book, which sort of kicked off a lot of management thinking and management research. And so it led to pretty large advancements for what it was intended: efficiency of workers, productivity of workers. So let's fast forward a number of decades to actually 1971 in particular. There were two scholars at the time, Richard Hackman and Ed Lawler, both being quite prominent. Richard Hackman, of course, being one of the most famous scholars of all time. He's quite known for his work on teams in particular, and how teams interact and how to make teams more efficient themselves. But in 1971, these two authors took on the topic of what they called job characteristics theory. And that was the idea of which characteristics of roles or jobs or tasks lead them to be more motivating for individuals. And the reason this came out of this idea of scientific management is because once that's taken to the extreme, right, of specializing and making people as efficient as possible, the flip side is they start to enjoy work less. They end up working on just a small piece of the puzzle and being hyper efficient for 8 to 12 hours a day. But with that comes sort of burnout. I want to leave, I'm absent more, I move on to different jobs. Because of that, Hackman and Lawler were thinking, okay, let's now kind of flip scientific management on its head and think more about what characteristics of roles can be designed so that people are motivated and happy at work. And so this job characteristics theory in 1971 laid out 5 different characteristics, the initial 5, that motivate people at work. And those are autonomy, so that's sort of obvious one, sort of freedom at work. It's important to know that autonomy then can be broken out into a number of different dimensions. And you can think of those as work scheduling autonomy. So that's the when and the where do I get my work done. You can also think about it in terms of the how do I get my work done, work methods autonomy. And then lastly, we can think about it in terms of decision-making autonomy. And am I able to make decisions at work, or do I have to pass them up the hierarchy? And that sort of naturally evolves over time, where once you're the leader of the organization, you obviously have nearly full autonomy over decisions, aside, of course, from the board of directors. Everybody always has a boss, remember that. The second characteristic is skill variety. Does my job entail the use of different skills, or is it just one thing I'm doing all day? Does it require physical as well as cognitive skills? Does it require me to be quick on my feet and creative? So this is also another important characteristic. After this, we also have task identity, where we sort of get into these interesting non-intuitive ones. Task identity is the idea that I see through tasks from beginning to end. Next is task significance. Does my job have an impact on other people? Sort of related to task identity, right? Because if you see that airplane flying at the end of the day, or see that car driving, you can actually see how your job is influencing others, which is obviously quite motivating. Lastly, in the initial conceptualization of job characteristics theory, is feedback from the job. So it's an interesting one that does my job in and of itself give me feedback into how I'm performing? So for example, an obvious case here is a sport like tennis. You get a lot of feedback from the job in that you know if it's inbounds or out of bounds when you hit it. Sales is similar. You know from the call right away, were they interested in talking to me? Are they now a warm lead in the future, etc. So does my job in and of itself give me feedback into how I'm doing, which is very motivating when I'm doing well. So this was a fantastic start, having these initial 5 characteristics within job characteristics theory. And the empirics of this 1971 study and many studies since actually back up that these 5 characteristics are indeed motivating for individuals. They result in more job satisfaction and higher performance as well. But in 2007, a really great group of researchers out of Michigan State realized, is this really the end of it? Is it just these 5 characteristics of tasks or jobs that result in motivation? Or is there a larger set, not only of task characteristics, but also social characteristics of the job, as well as broader work context characteristics? So what they did in this study is, for one, they did a meta-analysis, which is a really important technique in the research to sort of come to final answers on things, because it takes a number of different studies. Each study in and of itself has some variability about what it finds, but a meta-analysis takes, let's say, 100 different studies about a topic and combines those results to give a more definitive answer about a topic. So they were conducting a meta-analysis of these initial 5 characteristics of job characteristics theory, but also broadening it to think about what other characteristics of jobs in the social environment, in the work context, are motivating. So in addition to these initial 5 task motivational characteristics laid out by Hackman and Lawler in 1971, the authors of this 2007 study add an additional 5 to that task motivational bucket. So let's go through these. The first one is task variety. And for those of you taking notes along with me, you'll notice it sounds pretty similar to skill variety from the initial 5, right? But there's a slight distinction here, of course, a minute one, as happens sometimes in sort of definitional questions within research. Skill variety, of course, is using different skills across the job, but they can all be used within one task. Task variety, of course, is working on a number of different tasks throughout the day. So although these 2 dimensions are probably correlated, they are distinct enough to require different constructs here. The second edition from the 2007 authors is information processing. With a knowledge-based economy and knowledge-based jobs like consulting, for example, the information processing needs, that is the ability to take in a lot of different information, integrate, synthesize it, those demands have risen on people. So information processing demands of a job is another characteristic that needs to be added to the task motivational side. The next one is job complexity. Sort of an interesting one here. How complex is the job? Interesting because it's sort of a double-edged sword in terms of efficiency and satisfaction. There's a trade-off here, because as you get more complex, naturally you're going to be more satisfied because you're taking on a more difficult task. When you actually complete it, there's more of a feeling of satisfaction and mastery and competence in that. However, on the flip side, you cannot be nearly as efficient when working on a very complex task. So it's interesting when it comes to motivation and job satisfaction performance. This job complexity actually is a double-edged sword in some way. The next one, though, specialization, has actually been seen to decrease or eliminate this trade-off between efficiency and satisfaction, in that if I specialize in one thing, I'm going to naturally get more efficient at it over time, but also I'm not necessarily less satisfied because I can get so in-depth in my specialization. And there's satisfaction in that. If I can be the world's expert in something and go deeper into a topic than anyone ever has, I can be both very satisfied in my competence and my mastery of it, while also still being quite efficient. And then the last one of these 5 additional is problem solving. So that, as it sounds, does my role require solving difficult, non-routine, even creative problems on the day-to-day in the various projects that I'm working on? So that closes out the task motivational characteristics. Again, to summarize, we have the initial 5 from Hackman and Lawler, to which the Michigan State authors in 2007 added an additional 5. That brings us to the other 2 buckets, which are social and then work context characteristics, also added by the 2007 authors. Moving on to the social side of things. So again, this was a large contribution of this 2007 study, is that they actually brought in and integrated these various social characteristics of work to see which ones are motivating, and actually test this within the meta-analysis to see if these characteristics also result in more motivation of employees, higher job satisfaction, lower absenteeism and turnover, and higher job performance. So going through these, there are 4 different social characteristics of jobs that can be motivating. The first one is interdependence. That is the idea that I work closely with others, and my job and tasks that I do actually require the input of others, as well as the work product of others. I can't do my job until I have this piece of work from somebody else. And again, that interaction can be quite motivating, knowing I'm relying on other people and they are relying on me as well. The next is feedback from others. Again, if you're paying attention closely here, it's a little different than the feedback from the job itself that was initially laid out by Hackman and Lawler in 1971. This is instead, do I actually get feedback from people at work? Right? Do I finish a meeting or a presentation and my boss gives me some positive and constructive feedback on how I can do things better? And feedback, we know from actually decades of research, is quite motivating because it allows me to get better at a job. It gives me these feelings of mastery and competence that I so desire at work. The last 2 here for the social dimension are now social support. Again, probably the most obvious one here. Do I have a support system at work? Do I have people that I like? Because we know, again, that people are incredibly important at work. Not only your manager, but also your colleagues, your friends, the people that are not only going to give you sort of instrumental support, and that is help with work when you need it, but also that affective or emotional or just friendly support. If I just need someone to talk to at lunch and commiserate with, are they going to be there? Lastly, interaction with others outside of the organization, sort of a different and non-intuitive one on the social side. But again, it can be one that's quite motivating for people. Maybe someone that's in investor relations or government relations finds this to be an incredibly important aspect of their job. They like to know they're not just working within the confines of their organization, but it's having sort of a broader impact on other people, and they can see that directly in their day-to-day interactions with others. And lastly, this final bucket that the 2007 researchers add to job characteristics theory, which actually now is part of a broader work design theory, is this idea of work context more broadly. What is the work environment like aside from just the task and social characteristics? And so they have 3 dimensions here. The first are physical demands. Does my job require a lot of heavy lifting? Does it require endurance? Does it require me to bend down and lift up boxes all day? So that is one, and that can be motivating in one sense if I enjoy that, but it can also be quite demanding on the body and can be quite demotivating if that's all I do without any sort of variety. The second is work conditions, just sort of a broad catch-all for, is the temperature good in here? Do I have to deal with any health hazards in the air? Is there a lot of noise I have to deal with that's quite prohibitive? And the third is ergonomics. Do I have a comfortable chair? Am I able to sit with good posture? Am I able to move freely in my environment? So those 3 encompass that final bucket that the 2007 researchers added of work context. So where does that leave us overall? We have 17 different characteristics of jobs. We have the initial 5 from Hackman and Lawler in the task motivational bucket. We have an additional 5 that were added onto that task motivational bucket by these Michigan State authors in 2007. We have 4 dimensions added in this social bucket. And then of course we have these final 3 dimensions added in the work context bucket. So when you take all 17 of these characteristics, that's where things start to get interesting for people and employees, as well as organizations that are selecting employees, because you can actually take this as an individual that's thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? Take these 17 different characteristics and do a forced ranking of your preferences for them. In other words, array them from most important. Maybe for me it's autonomy, and the least important would be perhaps ergonomics, let's say. Take them for yourself, array them 1 to 17, and this is just a helpful exercise in general as you think about what you want to do in life. And then what's interesting, there's actually work that needs to be done by organizations as well, because as soon as an organization can also take a job, specific role within the company, and say, here are the 17 characteristics in order of how frequently they will be used or how important they are for a given job, you then have this kind of trivial matching exercise where if the company says, okay, the number one characteristic of this job is autonomy. You're going to have full autonomy over where you work, how you work, when you work, as well as decision-making autonomy. If that's the number one preference for you, this sounds like it's probably going to be a good fit. And so as organizations and even industries and government can sort of develop out for each different job, this ranking 1 to 17 of the various characteristics that are important in that job, and then each individual on the other side has their 1 through 17 ranking of which is most important, we start to get to a really good place where we can do a better job overall of matching people to organizations. And this can even start in high school, where people are really thinking about, what do I think is going to be important for me in jobs and help guide me into jobs within certain companies, within certain social contexts, within certain work contexts, that will be the best fit for me overall, where I can be motivated, satisfied, and perform well. In addition, I love the concrete application when it comes to job interviews. So as a recruiter, I'm often asked the question, the all-important question. So at the end of the interview, they ask me what questions I have about the organization or the job. What should I ask? To that I say, ask the questions you're interested in. And if you're having trouble thinking about the dimensions of jobs, go to this list. Go select out the ones in your preferences from 1 to 17 of these characteristics and think about those top couple. Maybe your number 1 is autonomy. And so you want to be asking, okay, how much autonomy is there in terms of when and where and how I do my work and how I make decisions on the job? Maybe next most important to me is social support. How much support am I going to have throughout my time at the organization, especially as I'm learning in the first 6 to 12 months? So you can really take this list, and especially once you've arrayed it into your preferences, it can really do a lot for you in terms of selecting a job, selecting a company, selecting an industry that's the best fit for you, and really guiding you through the interview process as well, and thinking about, how do I learn more from the interviewer about this job and this company such that I make the right selection for me and I end up in a job which I'm truly happy about. That is it for me. So we took this initial job characteristics theory, which is a part of broader work design theory, which was advanced in 2007 by a group of Michigan State researchers. We sort of repurposed their typology to think about, how do I select jobs, and even how do I ask good questions in interviews so I learn what's really important to me at work and I get those answers before I select into a job in a career. So that is it for now. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. Please like and subscribe, and otherwise I will see you next week.